Welcome to Criminal Justice 303 Corrections class. The members in my group are Teresa Steffens, Yesenia Delgado Ramirez, and Alexis Lavoie, and we're going to be talking about life without parole.
What does a life sentence do to someone's mental health? First, we must understand that life without parole is a fairly new concept in the United States. In 1982, the number of states that had life without parole was 21, and in 1996 it was up to 34, and it is now available in every state except Alaska. The United States represents just 4% of the world's population, yet holds 40% of the world's life-sentenced population. 1 in every 35 U.S. prisoners is serving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, while 1 of every 7 prisoners are serving some variation of a life sentence punishment. There seems to be an ideological shift from rehabilitation to policies that are more about deterrence, retribution, and incapacitation. While most life sentences are reserved for those who have committed serious and often violent crimes, 59% are serving sentences for homicide, 17% for rape or sexual assault, and 15% for aggravated assault, robbery, or kidnapping. Over 17,000 are serving life because of being convicted of a nonviolent offense, including 5,000 that have been convicted of a drug offense. This forces us to examine the concept of life without parole as a construct. Recent studies have compared life in prison without parole and studies of long-term confinement, looking at things such as intellectual ability, physical condition, personality, and interpersonal relationships. There is not strong evidence that long-term confinement shows high levels of deterioration. Yet, although not surprising, prisoners serving life without parole show higher levels of deterioration, especially in those that have been wrongfully convicted, as they seem to obtain a hostile and distrustful attitude toward the world. Those that are newly sentenced to life in prison without parole find it very hard to accept their fate. They believe they will be successful in an appeal and hold on to that hope. Although it's mostly due to delusion and denial, the hope of release is a powerful contribution to mental health. Newly sentenced to life without parole inmates are considered active agents to finding the meaning of life, largely based on false hope and usually lasting about 10 years. With other prisoners, such as those serving life with the possibility of parole, there seems to be an inverse relationship, whereas one construct goes up, the other goes down, between time served and depression, anxiety, guilt, loneliness, and sleep disturbances. If someone is in prison that is serving a life with the possibility of parole, their symptoms lessen over time. But those that are serving life without parole endure a higher level of suffering, with the difference being hope or lack thereof. Due to the permanency and indeterminacy of their sentence, this has been compared to someone being diagnosed with a terminal illness. According to Psychology Today, psychologists suggest that some prisoners, especially those serving very long sentences, use withdrawal and self-imposed isolation as a defense reaction to the anticipated loss of outside and social support. Using isolation as a defense takes its toll on prisoners who may experience protracted depression, apathy, and the development of a profound sense of hopelessness.
Up next, we will be talking about life without parole, racial population. In the United States alone, there are roughly 200,000 prisoners serving life sentences. Within those inmates, more than 2/3 are people of color. Race being a defined characteristic in the criminal justice system, it is commonly known that African Americans are disproportionately represented in prisons. Looking at different types of incarceration sentences shows us how persuasive these parties really are. According to a data table from 2014, about 57% of African American people were given sentences with life without parole. About 33% of them were white, and about 8% were Hispanic. Compared to the U.S. population, African American are overrepresented in jails, state and federal prisons, life and life without parole sentences, and death penalty sentences. Conversely, white people are underrepresented in those same categories. According to a data table from 2014, about 57% of African American people were given sentences with life without parole. About 33% of them were white, and about 8% were Hispanic. Compared to the U.S. population, African American are overrepresented in jails, state and federal prisons, life and life without parole sentences, and death penalty sentences. Conversely, white people are underrepresented in those same categories.
Lastly, we're going to be talking about life without parole for juveniles. Juveniles who have a sentence of life without parole are taken away from the free world without social interaction for the rest of their lives. This is a problem because minors are still developing and will have this punishment for a long time. According to Extinguishing All Hope, Life Without Parole for Juveniles, the United States currently has about 6,800 people serving life sentences from when they committed crimes when they were younger. Pennsylvania, California, Michigan, and Louisiana are a few states that have JLWOP prisoners still. Alaska, Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, and Oregon are states that prohibit JLWOP, meaning they don't have any youth serving JLWOP sentences. Minors could be prosecuted in adult criminal court instead of being prosecuted in the juvenile court. In the United States in the 60s, the U.S. Supreme Court established protections called due process. The Due Process Clause in the 5th and 14th Amendments guarantees someone rights such as life, liberty, or property. The juvenile courts need to consider this before transferring a juvenile to an adult court. In 2012, in the decision of Miller v. Alabama, the 8th Amendment prohibits against cruel and unusual punishment, not allowing juvenile homicide offenders the mandatory sentencing of life in prison without parole. In April 2018, Corey Grant was involved in a drug gang and ended up in jail due to a fatal confrontation with other drug dealers. He was 16 years old and sentenced to life without parole. Due to Miller v. Alabama, Grant was able to get resentenced and get out of jail at 72 years old. He feared that he would die before he gets to that age, so the Third Court of Appeals decided that a term exceeding life expectancy of a juvenile who committed a crime is unconstitutional under Miller.